Yo, there are only a couple of sports anime that I can look at and truly call great. You have Run with the Wind, which was able to express the heart and soul of what it is to run. Hajime no Ippo is a boxing anime that you can truly tell was created out of sheer love for the sport. We not only see the perspective and the story of our main cast of characters, like Ippo and everyone that goes to his gym, but we also see the perspective from the person that Ippo will be fighting. There's always some sort of character build-up whenever he goes into his fights, both with Ippo and everyone that he fights. Haikyuu also tells us a story, and I believe that story is the mind of the obsessed. While I was watching, I didn't initially perceive the anime this way. I mean, my first impression of it was just, it was a sports anime that had some really good animation. So I was like, okay, I'll watch this because I like some sports anime. But my perspective of the show started to shift whenever season 4 came out. Specifically whenever Hinata finally showed this development in his character. And there was something else that helped change my perspective for the show itself. And that was when the Inarizaki captain Kita said this.
俺が毎日1から10やっとるところを厚むみたいな連中は1から20やっとんねん。あるいはより効果的な10、密度の高い10。ほんでたまに1から10やなくて A から Z やってみたらどんなやろ。おもろいんちゃうかって考えたりする奴らやねん。
When I heard this line, something just clicked in my head. And I feel so stupid for thinking about it now because it was so obvious. Normal people usually express effort on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being minimum effort and 10 being maximum effort. But there are exceptional individuals that are not only talented but obsessed with their sports. These individuals follow an effort scale from 1 to 20, A to Z, or the 1 to 10 is weighted differently. What that means is that these obsessed individuals are not tied down by traditional thinking or training. Along with working out, practicing spikes, or really any other basic skills, they study other aspects that are very niche, so very small details that other people wouldn't even be aware of, or exert themselves in a situation where others may view it as a waste of energy or time, or the task is just too difficult for them. And it's not something that a coach can necessarily teach, because they simply would spend their time growing their athlete, changing the game plans and strategies. These small details like floor awareness, condition of teammates, predicting the path of shots, the pace and flow of games, details like that are very hard to express to individuals who think of the game very one-dimensionally. These exceptional individuals have another level of energy and focus that they can tap into while training, studying, even in the middle of games. They just have another level they can tap into that normal people just can't. They can exhaust their options from 1 to 10 and begin to focus on problems and solutions from A to Z, thinking of what they can and should do, and what is wrong or wasted efforts, or even how their bodies and teammates move. They can figure out new ways of doing things. People have inherent talents, strengths, weaknesses. We are simply just different. To explore and show what makes someone obsessed or a genius, we have many different characters and types of characters to refer to because Haikyuu does a really good job with giving us many different characters on different levels from normal to genius. So let's kick it off with a character that we see a lot of, Kageyama. When we are introduced to Kageyama, we know that he is not just a simple athlete that will show up and play, through how the characters act around him and how he treats other people. And once he takes the floor, we see these ideas get reinforced. He is a brilliant talent and has incredible setting skills. He is truly talented, but Kageyama isn't technically a genius here. He isn't obsessed. Well, he is obsessed, but it's not with volleyball. At this point, Kageyama is only obsessed with winning. Kageyama himself doesn't realize the fault in his own obsession at this point. We see him demand that other players play up to his level and do exactly what he wants them to do. We see this in how he plays the games, how he sets to other teammates whenever Hinata is still giving his all, as if he can still win the game. He demands all of his teammates play up to a certain level. He demands his teammates to run faster, jump higher, react quicker. That is the level he expects his teammates to play at, because he plays at that level. Clearly, this is very narrow-minded, seeing that his old middle school team eventually refused to play with him because he was making the game not fun anymore, refusing to hit his sets in the middle of a game. Kageyama continued this, but to a much lesser degree when he joined Karasuno. He refused to set to Hinata even in practices. He was only focused on winning the games in front of him, and he thought that Hinata, at his current level, was not good enough to help him win. Initially, this can be viewed as Kageyama just being cruel to Hinata, but Hinata is a very one-dimensional player. By all means, he sucks at this point. Kageyama isn't wrong to point out Hinata's faults here, and he isn't wrong with wanting Hinata to improve his all-around skills so he can be more effective. But the way he goes about using Hinata, or rather the lack thereof, that is where we see Kageyama's true faults. He said he will set to anyone that will give him a chance to win the game. And that proves that Kageyama is still solely focused on winning and not the other aspects of volleyball. Kageyama knows all of Hinata's shortcomings, sure, but he also knows all of his strengths. He knows he can jump high, he has fast reflexes, and he's quick. Those are very strong assets even if you have no other skills in volleyball. He could have worked around all of Hinata's flaws while also increasing Hinata's level of play and effectiveness, but he doesn't choose to do this. Instead, he opts to make Hinata improve his skills all around so he can be a more effective player, so he can help him win the game. Again, he's not necessarily wrong in thinking this. Hinata obviously needs to improve. Given the time constraint that they were given before this game, it was very unlikely that Hinata would make any meaningful progress to improve all of his skills. He was very fortunate to actually do so, but in general, there were a lot of other ways that Kageyama could have used Hinata more effectively with the skills that he already had. And that is where I want to introduce Oikawa. Oikawa is nearly the opposite of Kageyama in every respect, both from personality and how they approach volleyball. Oikawa is absolutely obsessed with volleyball. He and Kageyama are not on the same spectrum because he is operating on the spectrum that Kita was talking about. Oikawa is approaching the game from a sense of he can exert effort from 1 to 20, think things through from A to Z, and approach the game in a much different way than Kageyama can at this point. Oikawa approaches the game thinking about his role as a setter and what his position was meant to do and how he can be most effective himself. The answer he came to was figure out the best way to attack and to elevate everyone else's ability, to have everyone on his team play at their highest potential. That is his role as a setter. Not simply to choose when and where to attack, or how your teammates attack, but allow your teammates to elevate their game while playing with you. And he is obsessed with this aspect of the game. He knows the personalities, the play style of all of his teammates, and the flow of games. For example, Kunimi is a player that likes to conserve his energy through a game. He doesn't like to exert his energy on unnecessary things. Kageyama viewed this as simple laziness, and sometimes he was right, but most of the time he was wrong. Or should I say, Kageyama's approach was wrong. The way Oikawa handled this was he allowed Kunimi to give minimal effort in certain points of the game, mainly the beginning and some of the middle parts of the game. But when the end of the game grows near and everyone else is tired, that is when Oikawa lets Kunimi shine. By conserving his energy, he has a lot more in the tank than other players on other teams trying to guard him. And he can do a lot of damage because he has this level of energy. Playing the game like this, Kunimi is able to attack much more effectively because the blockers are tired and they have a hard time blocking and redirecting his shots. This elevates Kunimi's overall level of play and gives him opportunities to sway the game in their team's favor, giving them the momentum and disrupting the other team's momentum. We see this with Kendaichi as well. We see Oikawa working on a set that would bring out Kendaichi's most effective attack, even if he doesn't know it yet. In the beginning, Kendaichi thought that the set felt really weird, and he asked Oikawa if he could adjust because it felt uncomfortable. Oikawa gave it some thought, but he simply said that he understood, but they will be practicing with that set for a while anyway. Oikawa was able to see something in Kendaichi's game that allowed him to be more effective. And even Kendaichi himself didn't know that this could be a strength for him. Yet again, Oikawa is elevating someone else's game. Two characters that used to play alongside Kageyama. Oikawa has the ability to elevate his teammates' game to a level that they couldn't normally play at with other setters. Kageyama didn't quite understand this difference yet, because Oikawa was thinking on a different scale, on a different plane than he was at the time. After losing to Alba Josai, Kageyama and Hinata both knew that they had to change. Something had to change. Hinata's idea of change was attempting to keep his eyes open during the quick set, while Kageyama was simply looking for anything else, because he believes that Hinata's will isn't necessary for that quick attack. But after getting into some arguments with Hinata over this point, Kageyama eventually found himself going over to Oikawa's side of the pond, and he reluctantly asked for advice from Oikawa, the guy who just defeated him. And after begging, Oikawa gives Kageyama one hint. The one who has leadership in an attack isn't you. It is the one you're setting the ball to. Hinata being the person in question at the time. Oikawa believes that Hinata is on the right track with wanting to keep his eyes open during the quick set. Because if Hinata is able to keep his eyes open during the quick sets, and if he's getting sets that he wants where he is most effective, his overall game will increase. Going back to how Oikawa approaches the game, to elevate everyone else's play on the court. This small hint was what truly allowed Kageyama to begin growing. We see him begin to work obsessively on this new set that his coach pointed out would be very effective for both he and Hinata if they could pull it off. And we see him work obsessively on this new set, trying over and over, failing and failing, until he finally gets some success only to fail again. But he never gives up on improving with this set, because overall, it'll improve his chances in winning in games. And it'll also improve Hinata's effectiveness. And he does all of this work just to craft a set that only Hinata would be hitting. He's not crafting the set for anyone else to hit because, realistically, nobody else can do it. Not as effectively as Hinata can. This small change was what allowed Kageyama to truly start focusing on all the other aspects of volleyball besides just winning, like Oikawa. His thinking now hasn't entirely shifted just yet, but he's working on a set that'll only be used for one player's effectiveness. Overall, he is elevating Hinata's level of play just by developing a set that he can use effectively in games with his control and his will. And he's also no longer thinking of his role as a setter so one-dimensionally. He's finally beginning to think of his role in a much deeper sense than he has before. He has also now begun to view volleyball, the whole of the sport, in a much larger and broader view than he had before. The change is slight and subtle, but we see more and more that he's asking for feedback on his sets, and he notices when people don't like his sets. Tsukishima is another example of Kageyama's change. Tsuki always has a certain reaction to Kageyama's sets, which prompted Tsuki to tell Kageyama that he isn't the only person that is thinking on the court, in classic Tsuki fashion, of course. This is another example of Kageyama changing his approach for how he sets to other people. Tsuki, from the first moment we are introduced to him, he is a person that studies other people that he is playing against. In their first match against Kageyama, Hinata, and Tanaka, we see him constantly study the state of mind of Kageyama and Hinata, and ultimately he's trying to get in their heads, which he's very, very good at. Getting under people's skin is his favorite pastime. With Tsuki's small little retort, Kageyama realizes that Tsuki is doing much more than he initially thought. Tsuki likes sets that gives him time to choose what to do, to choose how to attack. Kageyama's initial sets to Tsuki was basically, hit the ball however I want you to hit it. And this small little change allows Tsuki to play at a higher level. He's able to play at his most effective now, using his greatest strengths not only on defense, but on offense as well, his mind. And in Season 4, whenever everyone returns from their training camps, Kageyama hears Hinata point out that Tsuki is hitting a lot lower than he was at training camp. Kageyama now incorporated two skills that Oikawa has also demonstrated: elevating your teammates to allow them to perform at their best, and testing a set that would make their teammates more effective. Hinata's special set is the quick attack set that they use, and Tsukishima's is a high set that allows Tsuki to think and judge what to do when he attacks. In a sense, both Kageyama and Oikawa are both demanding their teammates to do something. And I know what you're thinking. Earlier I mentioned that Kageyama demanding players to do something that he wanted them to do was a negative thing. So why is it a positive thing now? Well, you see, good leaders are always demanding. Oikawa is demanding. He's just demanding in a different way. Oikawa is not demanding his teammates to play a certain way or to play at a level that they are not capable of playing at. Oikawa is simply demanding them to use their skills and their playstyle in their most effective manner. Kageyama now has found the right way to do this. With Suki wanting to hit the ball lower, but being capable of hitting the ball higher, Kageyama demands that Suki plays up to his highest level. Again, Kageyama demanded his past teammates to play at a level that they couldn't, or in a way that didn't suit their style. But now he is simply demanding that his teammates play up to their best. We see excellent leaders do this all the time in the real world. It was also really special to me to see this moment with Kageyama when Tanaka is doing very well in one of their games. Ultimately, Tanaka feels like he is doing too well. He feels as if he's about to fall off the face of a cliff, telling Kageyama to not set to him anymore because he feels like he's ultimately going to start failing pretty soon. Kageyama emphatically tells him no, that Tanaka's attacks are what they desperately need right now, ultimately leading to a point where Kageyama believes he found Tanaka's greatest strength. And when Tanaka is under this immense pressure, Kageyama gives him the set, and this has become one of my personal favorite moments in the series. And throughout the entirety of Season 4, Kageyama just continues to grow and progress, and it is incredible to see how much of a monster he is truly becoming now. Hinata is a special case in this show when it comes to people being obsessed with volleyball, because he starts off the anime obsessed with volleyball. It wasn't a sport that he necessarily had access to in the beginning. In middle school, he didn't even have a boys' team. They only had a girls' team. He was the one and only member on the boys' volleyball team. But we see him become obsessed with volleyball whenever he is biking past a store and he sees Crossno's team playing on a national stage on television. And he sees this one short player called the Tiny Giants slaying these kids in the national tournament. And he just becomes enamored with volleyball immediately. He was someone who didn't have access to the sport because there wasn't a team for him to join. And he was only able to play in one game with his team of thrown together friends. And he lost that game. So why does Hinata not fit in the category of people who are geniuses and who are obsessed with volleyball at this point? I mean, the answer is very simple. He simply is not good enough. He doesn't have the talent or the skills necessary for the sport right now. Going back to my first point that I mentioned at the top of the video, Hinata is still unable to have a work level of 1 to 20, and he's not able to think things through A to Z just yet because he just doesn't have enough knowledge on the sport. He doesn't have the experience playing the sport, and he doesn't know that much about it really. He's very new to the rules of the sports. Hinata had this love and want to play a sport that he's never been able to play officially before, so of course he lacks in this part. Specifically the talent level part. He simply has not had enough time to develop his skills in volleyball, simply from not playing and not being exposed to volleyball yet. Hinata, in Kageyama terms, sucked in every aspect of the sport, receiving, blocking, hitting, and moving on the court in general. He simply didn't know what to do or how to do it yet. I mean, you can love something all you want, but that love is never going to make you incredible at the sport alone. Hinata starts out as the typical guy who sucks, but will eventually become a good character that we've seen before. But his character stands out because of how he develops through every season. Hinata is constantly grinding away, working, improving, and then hitting a wall that seems so insurmountable that it seems that no level of hard work can overcome it. Not to mention his own physical shortcoming is that he is, well, short. He's not as tall as other people who play volleyball, giving him a significant disadvantage right off the bat. It was a catalyst that forced him to go to a training camp to improve both his skills and how he viewed offenses in volleyball, mainly learning tempos and what to do during games. But something I will argue was an even bigger blow for Hinata than losing to Aoba Josai the first time was when Kageyama and Tsuki get invited to special training camps while he was just ignored. We've seen Hinata lose his composure before, but there was always something that he could do about his situation. But in this situation, there was nothing he really could do. I mean, to be chosen by somebody else is something that's completely out of your control. Your skills will speak for themselves, and people didn't view him as someone who was special or had the potential to be special. And since he wasn't invited to either of these special training camps, he didn't know how to deal with it. And we see that Hinata is a much improved player with his skills sharpened, but nothing else screams that he is an outstanding player. He's simply missing too much in his game to be recognized as a genius currently. But in typical Hinata fashion, he doesn't just give up. From here, he opts to sneak into the training camp that Tsuki was invited to at Shiratorizawa. From here, he is told he can stay, but it is only as a ball boy. He will not be participating in any of the practices as a player, but just as someone who is helping around. I love this part of the anime because of what I expected this part to do. Because you see in most anime, whenever someone's told they can't do something, they get along with that person, they eventually win them over, and they're allowed to begin the practice or whatever they were trying to do. But Haikyuu doesn't do this. The entire time Hinata was there, he was a ball boy. And again, that was something that I didn't expect. We see Hinata struggle with this fact too, the fact that he can't practice and participate with strong players that he wants to compete against. We even see him begin to lose his composure and start to break down when he goes in the closet to get the mops. We see him wondering, what was he doing, and why did he go to a training camp that he was not invited to? Then there is this amazing moment where Hinata just keeps telling himself to gain a new perspective, to find some reason to be there, to adjust the way that he is thinking. When he comes back out to the court, we see this new enthusiasm in him. He has gained a new perspective. We see him begin to study everyone's movements, what they do before receiving, how they move with the blockers, how people spike. He's observing everything, even the flow of games. This is where Hinata finally begins his journey to becoming a genius. Before I mentioned that Kageyama was lacking in perspective, and that was holding him back. People get hung up on how they perceive their sport or what they're doing. They get stuck in this black and white, good and bad, right and wrong. They get stuck in this one-dimensional mindset, and not everyone is able to exert effort from 1 to 20, or think things through from A to Z. It's not something that can generally be taught in a deeper sense either, because a coach would rather improve your skills and game plan with the amount of time that they have with you, instead of trying to explain every niche detail that you should be looking for that could make someone great. But again, these small details could confuse and hold back a lot of people that are trying to understand them, because a lot of people just can't understand these small niche details. That is why self-discovery is so important, and why I love this perspective shift from Hinata. We see him not only try to practice these new moves that he's picking up from observing everyone else practice, but he also gets enamored with the small details, every small detail that he sees while he is viewing the other players at this training camp. And there's a section where he's hanging jerseys up in a higher rafter area. Higher rafter area, what the heck? And there's this part when Hinata is hanging up wet jerseys to dry off in this upper area of the court. He notices that he hasn't really viewed a volleyball game from in the stands. He's only viewed the volleyball game from on the court. He even takes advantage of this small detail. He has quite literally changed his physical perspective. And we see him pick up on things that he wouldn't have noticed otherwise. He also starts to think about other smaller details too, like what he should be eating. And I mean, that may seem like a small detail to most, but for higher level athletes, diets can change everything. And this isn't just a one and done thing either. Whenever Hinata and Tsuki return from the camp, we see Hinata observing every one of his teammates during practices, noticing smaller things here and there, and again, applying the skills that he has learned and is refining from the camp to his everyday practices, trying to improve his set of skills. He is just absorbing all of this information and trying to apply some of the things that he sees and views from other people and tries to piece it into his game to help improve himself. This leads up to Hinata showing massive growth during the matches that take place in Season 4. At first, very sloppily anticipating where the ball is and getting smacked in the face constantly. He is also moving with his teammates while they block and trying his new skills that he's picked up during training camp, just in games now. All of this compounded into two of the greatest moments of the show, giving Tsukushima's block a real run for its money because that was incredible as well. That being his receive, and him setting the ball high when his teammates were sprinting themselves to death. Thinking back on who Hinata used to be, just a kid who loved the sport but wasn't very good at it, to a player that noticed that his teammates were strangling themselves by overpacing themselves in a high-pressure game. And he saved the game by doing something that everyone else can do, but not everyone has the perspective to do. Bumping the ball high so everyone can take a breath and reset. But not everyone has the wherewithal to be able to do this in an intense, high-pressure game where if you lose, then that's it. Haikyuu does an incredible job in giving us examples of people who are obsessed with volleyball, and especially different levels of obsession. You have people who are obsessed with every detail, like Oikawa, the Miya twins, Hinata, Kageyama. We also have characters like Tanaka, who's just a normal person. A simple, normal person. But he's so endearing because he's so simple. Because he's so simple and because he knows he's just a normal, average player, he continues to grind. And he has the strongest mental game of anyone we see in the show. They give us examples of geniuses, extraordinary, talented, obsessed players. And they also give us examples of just normal people who want to play volleyball. This brings me to my last point. What Kita said at the last half of when he was talking about geniuses.
世の中かなわんと思う人たちはいっぱいおって、そういう相手をすごいなと思うのが当然や。突っ走れることは才能やと思うし、あいつらをなんて呼んだってええねん。天才は悪口やないしな。けどあいつらのことを最初から優秀なんやと思うことは勝負するまでもなく負けとるっちゅうことやし。
This part hit really close to home for me because there were times in my early life of competing in sports where I believed people were better than me simply because they were born better. I know better now, and looking back, I'm able to see that I was just simply making excuses for myself. Instead of thinking that someone was just simply born better than me, the questions I should have been asking myself is how hard did that person work to get to the level that they are at? What could I do better? Can I do more? Because what Kita says is true. You lose by default because you don't know how long someone has trained just to become proficient at one skill alone. You're simply giving yourself an easy way out, a way that you don't have to take the hard path. And we all are guilty of this because we all don't want to see ourselves as slackers and as losers. But there's nothing wrong with losing, with being defeated, because losing is a part of life. And when you lose, you learn. When you fail, you learn and develop as a person. Haikyuu is not only an anime that focuses on people who are obsessed with volleyball, but it is a good example of how people can become obsessed with anything and how hard you should work for something that you love to do. I love how Haikyuu gives us so many amazing characters that all share the same obsession for volleyball, just at different levels. Some people are crazy about the sport, who think about it every day, day in and day out, inside and out. We also see people who just love to play the sport. People who love to compete on a team where their members have become something more akin to family than just club members. Haikyuu shows us what it takes to be considered a genius at something, to be considered great at something. And it's something that you're not necessarily born with. It is how you train, how you perceive yourself, how you learn, and how persistent you must be when truly chasing something that you love to do. That is Haikyuu and the mind of the obsessed.
セッターはセットするんが仕事やで。適切な位置にボールをセッティングするんや。で、アンダーは腕2本、オーバーは指10本。よりいっぱいのもんで支えたんねん。セッターやもん。